might have heard that it's no longer enough to just be a great developer. You need to be speaking at conferences, blogging, committing to open source, engaging with the community, and the list goes on. And you're probably thinking, why? Why is my technical ability not enough? Well, the short answer is a lot of times people making decisions about your career don't actually see your code, and they should be hearing and seeing your name. Funny enough, if the right people know your name, you don't even have to be a good developer. Now, I'm not suggesting write bad code, but enhancing your personal brand can really help to develop your career. So hi, everyone. Oh, it's not clicking. There we go. Hi, I'm Sam, for those who know me. I go by she, her as pronouns. I am a global community manager for Snyk, which means I help developers adopt security into their software development life cycles. I also help run the DevSecCon community, which is a community that helps bridge the gaps between developers, operators, and security practitioners, and produce the Secure Developer Podcast, which is a podcast for developers covering security tools and methodology. So that's enough about me, though. If you want to know more, you can stalk me on LinkedIn, you can follow me on Twitter, or you can chat to me on the My DevSecOps Discord channel if you want to talk. But that's enough about that. So what am I going to cover today? So we're going to talk a little bit about public speaking, because I'm standing on stage, so might as well talk about it. We're going to talk about call for papers, CFP committees, a bit about blogging and community engagement. I'm even going to talk about a bit of open source projects and how to contribute to them. And finally, we're going to talk about actually how to find work through community, because who hates writing a CV? I do. Cool, but the biggest disclaimer I have right now is I'm going to cover a lot of things, and you don't have to do all of them. Pick one or two things that work for you and go from there. Growing your personal brand through community and helping you advance your career doesn't mean you need to do a million things. It's time-consuming. You have day jobs and families and social lives. Pick one or two things. So let's kick it off with public speaking. Eventually this clicker will work. But yeah, if the idea of standing in front of 100, 200, 300 people literally gives you a panic attack, then don't do it. But if you have a fear of, what am I going to talk about? There's experts out there that know more than me, then this is something we can work with. So what do you talk about? Well, I believe that there's a conference talk in all of you. Think about the jobs you do, the hobbies that you work on, the projects that you create, and think about the things that you have learned. Have you ever been working on a project and you get stuck and you think to yourself, if only someone had solved this problem? So we go onto Google and we go on Stack Overflow and we read some human's blog, and eventually we find the solution and we think, if only I knew what I know now. Well, there's your conference talk. You've written it already. Other things you can cover are things like, there we go, like, what can't you solve? Do you have good team dynamics? I love the, what problems can't you solve? Because if you've tried 3 things and you do a talk about how you can't solve the issue, number 1, someone in the audience might have solved that, and so you inspire them to give a talk. Or number 2, you save someone a lot of time making the 3 mistakes that you just made. So it doesn't always have to be about this great thing you sort of solved and achieved. What's gone wrong? What should have been really easy but wasn't that you can tell people about? What experiences made things interesting for you? The other fear a lot of us have is, I'm not an expert. Someone else knows more than me. We've seen some great speakers today at the conference. This is probably true. But if I use the analogy of, say I'm a startup and I've just started my very first company, and I go to a conference and I hear a talk about how Twitter made their first billion. Like, that's interesting. But if I'm an early stage founder, all I want to know is, how do I survive my first year without going bankrupt? So to use another analogy, if we think about climbing up a mountain, we always look at who is ahead of us in the mountain. We think, oh, they're at the top of the mountain. We want to beat them. They're amazing. But we fail to turn around and see that people are climbing up the mountain behind you, and they just want to know where to step next. And the talk or the blog post or the thing that you do within the community can really help that person get to their next step. So yes, there are experts out there, and yes, they will know more than you, but that's okay. I also want to say that if you do write a talk, it's okay to submit that talk to many conferences and meetups. I'd love to think that everyone in this room are the only people that ever want to know how to do these things, but chances are they're not. I know today is recorded and someone can watch it online, but again, how many people are actually going to go off and look for, Sam Hepburn's talk on how to engage with community? So we can do it a number of different places. But the one thing I'd say is you always want to be improving your talk. You always want to be asking for feedback. How can I make things better? The problem when we ask for feedback, though, is, I don't know if you've ever asked for feedback from anyone. No one likes giving bad feedback. So it's always like, oh, it was great. You did a great job. Well done. And so if you actually want tangible feedback, invite someone to your talk with the sole intention to listen for feedback. That can be on the content itself or how you present. So when I was really early in my speaking career, I was really nervous. So I'm not technical. I help build software developer communities. I can code hello world, and that is about it. And so when I first started speaking, I used to fidget a lot with my clothing. I was nervous. I was uncomfortable. And so that was the feedback I got early on. And so then I went out and spoke to some people who were great at presenting and said, well, what did you do? And the first thing they told me was hold something in your hand. Because the first thing you do is you move that around. I used to hold a pen, a water bottle, a clicker, and it stopped me from touching my own clothing. My latest thing is I either talk too fast, which I'm trying not to do, so sorry if I do, or I a lot. Haven't ummed yet, but I guarantee I will at least one time in this presentation. And that's okay as well. So when you get feedback, take on the feedback, try and improve, but if you do the thing you were told not to do, that's fine. We get better every time. People are coming to hear that the content that you have to share, not necessarily how you look or if you're funny, your hair was standing this way, I got told that today, what top you're wearing, that's not about it. So it's okay to constantly improve. On that note. Another good thing about feedback is think about who your target audience is. So if I was giving a talk now and it was aimed at junior developers, I'm going to invite a junior developer along to give me feedback. Because then I know, is it too senior for them? Is it too low level? What did they learn? Could they follow along? Yes, it's nice to ask my boss's boss's boss to come along because he's the head of the company and that might be cool. But if the content doesn't aim towards him, he won't know how to give, or her, won't know how to give me tangible feedback. So also think about the people that are coming along. The next thing you might say to me is like, cool, Sam, that's great. I would love to give a talk, and that's why I'm in this room. But I don't think I'm ready to stand on stage in front of, a lot of people. I want to practice a bit. I want to get better at it. That's fine too. You can start actually with the teams you work with. So if you're working on something in the office, whether your team needs to learn more about it or other teams need to learn more about it, you can then book a meeting room, jump on Zoom, do a lunch and learn. Ask your company to pay for some lunch. That's always nice. And then you can start to practice it and get feedback so that when you are delivering that talk, you've at least done it once or twice. You can then go on to give it at meetups and communities. So if any of you were in the NLJUG update earlier today, they said they're doing things like speaker clinics and getting involved in the community. Go and speak to your local communities about what you can talk about. As I said, I run the DevSecCon community, and we have an open CFP that you can submit to all the time for any of our communities globally. We have one here in the Netherlands, but a lot of meetups don't have a place you can submit. So you want to reach out to the meetup organizers. If you're a little bit nervous about emailing or reaching out in that way, go to some of the events and actually have a conversation with them. What is the content they're looking to cover within their communities? And if you say, Sam, that's all cool, but actually I traveled on a train and 3 horses and a go-kart to get here and there's no community in my local area, that's fine too, because there's loads of virtual places you can get involved. There's even the VJUG, and I know that a lot of the VJUG organizers are here today, so you can even chat to them about what they're looking for. But there are loads of places to get started. So just speak to different people. Now, I've said the word CFP a lot of times, and you might know exactly what I'm talking about, or you might have gone, she has a funny South African accent, and is that the word she was saying? Saying CFP. And the great thing about submitting for a CFP is, so in a lot of other industries, conferences are invite only. You have to know who's who and be who's who to get invited. The amazing thing about technical conferences is we can submit. And there's 2 great reasons for that. One is obviously we can grow our own personal profile because we have something to share. But for the conference organizers, it's like gold. They know what the cool, hot technologies are coming out, who the speakers are, how they can be more diverse. So you always want to get involved in CFPs. And so I'm actually going to talk a little bit about what it means to submit a CFP. You can obviously go to the speaker clinic coming up for the NLJAG, but I'm going to run through a few of the do's and don'ts when it comes to submitting for a call for papers. So the first thing I'd say is your title is key. It's usually about 50 to 80 characters. And it really does need to sell the talk. I'll put my hand up first to say I'm not the best at writing titles, getting better, so don't beat yourself up if you are struggling to come together with it. But here's a few tips and tricks to help you along the way. There they are. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that it is catchy and it covers, what are you going to be talking about? You can use things like humor, which is really cool, but remember to be careful with what type of humor you are using within your talk titles. At the end of the day, if I read your title, will I know what your talk is about? You don't have to be fancy and overcomplicated. Funny enough, numbering goes down really well. So if I had to relabel today's talk, instead of saying hacks to use, what's my title? Community hacks to get you hired, or whatever it is, I can say 50 tips in 50 minutes. I don't have 50 tips for you, unfortunately, today. But 5 tips in 5 seconds, that type of stuff goes down really well. So it's okay to use numbering. But think about the talk title. Your talk title is not going to obviously get someone to accept your talk, but a good title will actually make the CFP committee look at your abstract before others. And that's kind of what we want to do. We want to try to get on the top of the pile in some way. But the biggest no-no, please don't do it. Please do not use sexual references, inappropriate language, and we all hate rockstar ninja, sort of weird labels like that. And you'd think this is obvious, but sometimes we come up with a really catchy title that we think is funny. And only when we run it past our friends and colleagues, we don't realize that it was sexist or it was offensive to another community. So be very careful when you are coming up with humorous titles that it's not going down in the wrong way. Just something to think about. Cool. So you're like, Sam, I got my title. Then we're going to talk about abstracts, because I hate writing abstracts. I had to get someone to check the abstract for this session 5 times. But again, a good abstract, there we go, can really help you sell your session for a CFP committee to look over it. So again, a few top tips. There we go. You want to keep it short and to the point. Long, rambling abstracts can actually get you marked down when it comes to submitting a CFP. Our CFP committees look through hundreds of sessions, and so they want to get to the point pretty quickly. Is there a clear takeaway? So if you're going to write this whole thing about your talk and not say, what is someone going to learn? At the end of this, a developer will be able to do X, Y, and Z, or implement this. You want to sell your idea, but try not to use too many buzzwords. Think about it if you were reading the session title. I like to use a framework called What's in it for me? So if I was an attendee in the audience and I read your abstract, what am I going to learn? How will your talk change my life in some way? Will I be able to do something better? Will I understand a tool better? So think about that when you're putting a talk together. And again, bullet points are your friends. You can do a summary, and then again jump into, and these are the few things that you will learn. So if I tell you the don't do's again, don't make it too long, please. TLDRs are great for that, but pick the 3-4 key things that you want to cover and put it on there. Less is more when it comes to an abstract. If I read your abstract and it's pretty much your talk, why am I coming to your talk? Then we talk about blogging. A great place to sanity check if your talk and your abstract is going to work well is talk to your colleagues. If you have started your speaking career by doing lunch and learns and things like that in your own office, then one, they know what you're going to talk about, so they can look at your abstract and your title and go, yep, that's what you're trying to say. But if you haven't done that, ask them, do they think it's catchy? Reading the abstract, what do they think they're going to learn? Because if you are trying to tell someone how to paint an orange, and when they read your abstract, they're like, oh, you're going to tell me how to build a house, obviously we've gone somewhere a little bit wrong here. So ask your team, ask the people around you. A few very short sort of other bits to cover is You want to make sure that you also run your session through a spell checker. Now, if you're like me, I'm actually dyslexic, and spelling and grammar is not my speciality. English might not be your first language, but if you are new to speaking especially, and you submit an abstract with a lot of spelling and grammar mistakes, it may lead the CFP committee to judge whether the talk will be, sort of as good in terms of attention to detail. You will never not be accepted because you have a spelling mistake, but making sure that it is sort of put together quite well can go a long way. And there's tools out there. If anyone does struggle with this, Grammarly is like my favorite tool because it doesn't only tell you what is, like the spelling mistakes, but the sentence structure as well. Sometimes I've thrown off by how badly those little red lines are. Cool. Now, when you're submitting to a conference, a lot of the time, there are more than one track involved. And so when you submit to a CFP, they have a laundry list of tracks that you can then submit to. Please take a few minutes out of your day to read the track abstracts before submitting. A lot of the time, a CFP committee will actually be formed around each individual track. So if you submit to the wrong track, the committee will try and recategorize it and send it to the right team. But the worst thing that can happen for both the speaker and the conference is if you submit it to the wrong track and you don't get accepted because the wrong eyes saw it. So please take 2 seconds. They're not just there for read the actual descriptions. Don't just go, well, it's a Java talk, so I'm going to select Java. Because if you read a bit more, maybe it's a people and culture talk because you're talking more about methodology and practices, even though, yes, you're covering Java. So think about that when you're submitting your sessions as well. And again, if we circle back to your team, coordinate with them. How many people here come from quite large organizations? Cool. So chances are there's a few of you that will all want to submit to very similar conferences. If you coordinate with each other, one, when you submit your session, it doesn't mean that the right speaker from the right company is going to be accepted. So talking to each other about what you're hoping to submit, what you're hoping to relay, will go a long way to also help the CFP committee understand what's going on. You also have different specialities. So yes, a sort of technology or an ecosystem unspecific conference you can all submit to. But like us personally, so I work at Snyk, we have people who are more specialists in Java versus JavaScript with Python, and they will choose which ones they submit to based on that, because Brian is a better speaker for our Java events, and Laurent is better for our JavaScript. So just think about that as well when you're talking to each other. And again, don't. Please do not submit product pitches, sales pitches. I'm sure you have been to a conference somewhere where you go and you think you're going to a really cool talk and you sit down and the person spent an hour demoing their product. Chances are you might have used their product, but now you're unsold. But if you're like me and you want your company to pay for your flights and accommodation and travel and give you the time off to go and not take it out of your annual leave, you do want to start to grow a little bit of your company's brand in order to get to those events. So now how do we talk about that in a way that isn't a product pitch or a sales pitch? So I'm going to use Brian again as an example, because he's sitting right here. But Brian works with me at Snyk, and Snyk is a security tool, obviously, for developers. Now, he could sit there and spend an hour demoing the product, but no one wants to do that. So he talks about how to be more secure. He gives content to the audience that will be applicable to them regardless of what tool they use. But if he's going to live exploit something and do something in vulnerability management, he's going to do that in the Snyk environment. He's not going to use a competitor's tool to show how to fix a problem. Also, hopefully, if you learn enough from him, when you are thinking of a tool, you'll think of Snyk. So there are a lot of ways to get your company's brand in front of places without having to sell anything. If you don't have a product or a service, obviously just being from that organization will raise their brand. How many people here know Trisha G? She used to work for JetBrain. She does a lot of speaking. Cool, she's great, you should watch her talks. So Trisha, early on in her career, worked for a company called LMAX. And she used to go out and speak a lot at events. Never spoke about what LMAX did. They had a bit of an open source tool. She spoke about how to use it. And eventually she left LMAX. And they couldn't figure out why people weren't applying for jobs at their company anymore. They never really used to pay a lot for recruitment. And they realized just her standing on stage and talking about the cool projects that they were working on attracted people to come work for them. So there are loads of ways of growing your company's brand without doing a product pitch. So please don't do it. Cool. Now you might say to me, Sam, you've sold me on the dream. I want to do a talk. I've practiced and everything, but 50 minutes is a long time to talk in a session. And I agree, when I was putting together this presentation, I was like, what am I going to talk about for almost an hour? But there's loads of other types of conference sessions that we don't always look and see that we can submit to. So I'm going to be very brief and tell you a few of them so you can maybe see what's right for you. So obviously we have the keynote session. No, let's skip that one. We have the keynote session. We all know what keynotes are, but actually their length is determined by the conference itself. But this is going to set the tone and the theme for the conference, so they're not always technical sessions. A lot of the time a conference wants to tell a story in that year. They've called it a theme. So when you are submitting, they can vary. I help run Devoxx UK, and all our keynotes are 20 minutes long. They're not hour-long sessions. So think about that when you're kind of submitting. You've obviously got the conference session, which I'm doing now. They're usually around 50 minutes. Yes?
Are keynotes mostly supplied by sponsors?
No, not at all. Depending on the conference itself. So the question was, are keynotes mainly supplied by sponsors? Depending on the conference and how community-driven it is, it's not. So for argument's sake, if I use Devoxx UK as an example, all of them are selected by the committee. We go out and find amazing speakers, because the keynotes are also going to draw the crowd, right? Some more corporate conferences do sell their keynote sessions, but it all depends on the conference. But you can submit for a keynote session. So yes. When it comes to conference sessions, they do vary in length as well. If you do a virtual session, they tend to be a little bit shorter, because obviously attention spans online are a bit shorter. But again, they don't necessarily need to be technical. I'm not giving you a technical session right now, and I'm standing at a software security conference. So you can think about things outside of technical sessions that you can get involved in. Hands-on labs. So hands-on labs are really, really nice, especially if you don't want to talk for a long time, but you want to teach someone something. So these are usually, depending on the conference, it can be 2 hours. I know the ones coming up at JFall are 4 hours long. Now that can seem quite intimidating, but your thing is to teach someone something within that time. So if we go back to the CFP and we're submitting, you might want to break down for the CFP committee what you're planning to do almost every 30 minutes or so within that, so they get an idea of the journey you're going to take the human on, and again, what is in it for the attendee to come? What will they learn? And it doesn't need to be the most advanced, in-depth thing, because that one thing you want to teach might be really applicable to the audience. But please break it down. One of my favorite types of sessions are BOFs, and these aren't always widely known as to what they are, but they're called birds of a feather. They're an hour long, they're super informal. Usually a host kicks off the session with a certain subject matter or line, and then it actually opens to the floor for interaction. So if you want to practice speaking out loud at a conference and don't necessarily want to stand on stage, look in the agenda if there are any BOFs and go to them. If you don't want to answer a question, you can ask a question and start to get involved in that way. I really love BOFs. And usually they're fun at the end of the day, and sometimes they involve beer, and it's kind of fun. My other favorite talk type is actually panels. So the cool thing about a panel is you don't have to be the only expert. So if you have a fear of, what if someone asks me a question and I can't answer it? Well, first of all, don't worry about that, just say you don't know. But if you don't know, on a panel, you've got 2 or 3 other people that can save the day. Also, sometimes you will get the questions before the panel itself as to what theme they're planning to go down, so you can prepare what type of questions you want to answer if it makes you feel more at ease. You can also be the person that asks the questions. So early on, and I still do it now, a load of ways I used to get up on stage was doing panel events. I remember I ran an event on the road to technical leadership. And again, not a technical leader, but I sat on stage with like the head of technology from McLaren and Nike and all these cool places and really boosted my brand. But all I had to do was ask them compelling questions. I didn't need to be the expert. So if you think to yourself, oh, there's a few people out there that do some amazing things in Kotlin or containers or whatever it may be, why don't you reach out to them and say, hey, I want to put together a CFP and pitch us going on stage and talking about this. It makes you feel more at ease because you're asking the questions and not answering them. You have some awesome people to share the stage with, and it really helps to grow your own brand within the community. Cool. Last but not least are quickies, lightning talks, ignites, whatever you want to call them. They are all similar-ish in style. They range from 5 minutes to 20 minutes. Some of them have slides that automatically change, and it's very scary. Some of them don't. But again, it's a quick fire session. So if you think, you know what, I've got this one thing I want to teach someone, and I don't want to fill the rest of the time with ramble like Sam's doing right now, these are great sessions to do. You're also, if you are a bit nervous, it's only 5 to 20 minutes of your life that you will, never get back, but then it's done, and then you've done it once, and you've stood on a stage, and it's over, so it's not very long, but again, great things to get involved in. But the final thing I want to say is never, ever, ever give up. You will submit CFPs, and you will be rejected, and it is not the end of the world. There are millions of reasons why you can be rejected, not just because your talk is terrible. One, you get way more CFP submissions than there are spots at a conference. So CFP committees have to make really difficult decisions on which ones they're going to accept and which ones they're not. So it's okay. Again, you want feedback and you want to iterate and change. A CFP committee doesn't have to give you feedback, but I always say try your luck and ask for it. If they won't give you feedback, there are speakers at conferences you go to all the time that you can ask to check your applications. You can reach out to the CFP committees themselves and ask for guidance and advice, and communities have workshops, like the NLJUG has their speaker clinic coming up. I'll give you an example. I'm running a conference next week, shameless plug, DevSecCon 24. It's virtual. It's all about software development security. Come along. But we had a company submit about 4 or 5 sessions, and all of them got rejected. And so they reached out, and they were like, why did we reject it? They're a cool company. We've had them speak before. And so I went onto the applications, and I looked up what the CFP committee had said. Now, 4 out of the 5 sessions were all on API security. We are a small conference, and we're not going to accept 4 sessions all on API security. Someone else's session just was out stronger, and we accepted theirs. One of their sessions was really well written, but there was no, what was the outcome? We couldn't figure out, what is anyone going to learn from this? We thought they might be a bit too, in the clouds thinking and great for an executive conference, but we wanted some tangible things out of it, and so we've given them that feedback so they can improve for the next conference. So remember that the reason why you get rejected is not because you are terrible at writing CFPs. It's just a hard job for everyone, so keep on trying. And again, you can test them at meetups and communities in different places. So you spend all this time working. I think I didn't start my timer, so I have no idea how long I've been speaking for. But we spent a lot of time talking about speaking and writing CFPs and abstracts and all the rest of it. And so you're going to spend a lot of time doing this. And then, yes, maybe you do it a few times and there's 5, 10, 100 people in the room. But that is a lot of time and effort you have spent on that session. So how do we make it work for us? How do we make sure that people access the content in different ways? Also, people learn in different ways. So I like to learn through listening. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. Other people, they skim read. That's all they do. So they jump onto blogs, they skim read some stuff, and that's how they learn. Other people like to watch, so video content. I think you get my point here. What I call this content recycling, and content recycling is amazing. And this is actually going to bring me on to blogging. So if the idea of writing scares you, again, you don't need to do it, but I'd say give it a go. As I said, I'm dyslexic. People in the audience might not have English as a first language, and it's scary to write. But there are loads of humans out there that can proofread for you. You can ask friends, colleagues, and if you don't want to do that, you can pay services like Fiverr for a small fee. They will check your things. Again, you can use Grammarly. So if it's that fear of writing, please I can say don't get stressed out too much, but please don't get stressed out too much. So when I write my talks, I think about recycling when I do it. So I write down my entire talk as I say it, and then I decide where I'm going to put my slides, like where it makes sense. But because I've written out my entire talk, and I have the basis for a blog, so even though writing scares me, I write it all down to get my train of thought. I've then spent half the time doing a blog post, so a blog's not actually that scary. If you do enjoy writing and speaking is a thing that you're scared of, well, write the blog post, and then that can be the basis for the next talk you write. You want to think about how it can work for you. If you are researching a certain problem online and you find someone who's just answering them really, really nicely, maybe you reach out to that person and you ask if they will be a guest on your podcast or your video series or whatever type of content you do. But again, if I'm thinking of recycling, I'm going to get that podcast or that video transcribed, and I'm going to use that content for a blog or a talk. And if you put it on YouTube, it automatically transcribes it for you. It's not very good on the technical jargon, but it gives you a general sort of overview that you can then download and start to work on, so you don't have to physically type it all out. But think about it. When you're doing things, you're spending so much time and effort on whether it's a blog or a talk or whatever. Make sure people can access that content in different ways. And that actually brings me to getting involved with the community itself. So again, we go online, we're looking for a problem, and we probably find people asking very similar questions. Then we find the solution, and we go on our merry little way, and we leave all those people on the internet to fend for themselves. Well, a great way to grow your profile in the community is to help answer their questions. So take the solution you've just found and go answer their questions. Don't be scared to use someone else's solution. Credit them for helping you. But sometimes the way you rephrase something and help with something else can be the world of difference, again, for the next person. And it might inspire you to write a blog or do a talk or do a podcasting series. And again, people learn in different ways, so that can be the way that they access that content, if we think about accessibility. Going to events, speaking at conferences, blogging, we get to see awesome people. We get to learn from them, we get to learn from our fellow speakers, but also don't forget about the humans that are sitting right next to you in the room right now. You're all here because you're passionate about what you do. You work on cool things. Talk to each other, learn from each other. Potentially your co-speaker is sitting right next to you. The person you're going to have on your podcast next is right next to you. And again, when we speak about how to find a job later, half the people sitting in the room are working at companies that are either hiring or they're thinking of moving on. And if someone is leaving a job, it doesn't mean that the place that they're leaving is the worst company in the entire world. They just want to move on, and maybe that position is your next great position. So speak to each other, not just the cool humans in front. So we talk about committing to open source projects now. So obviously that's another way of getting involved. If you never want to stand on stage, you never want to be on a video or podcast, and you just want to be online and do cool things, you can get involved in open source projects. There are loads of ways to get involved and loads of reasons why you should. So obviously you can help improve the software that you rely on every day. You work with open source tooling all the time, you can help improve the tooling that you're working on. And it's a great way to sort of grow your community and make lifelong friends, really. You can improve so many different types of skills. So committing to open source or getting involved in open source projects doesn't just mean coding. If you like to design, if you like to write, if you like to organize, there is a role within an open source project that you can get involved in and start to practice those types of things. And I'll jump more into that in a minute. Again, you can meet really interesting people with similar ideas. I know a lot of people have made lifelong friends through committing to open source projects, especially communities that are welcoming, that you want to go back into because people love to collaborate. So also, if you're maintainers on any open source projects, please make welcoming communities for people who want to come back. You can find mentors and teach other people. So part of that is you can pair with humans. You can answer other people's questions and get involved in that. So it's a nice way to, one, find mentors to help yourself, and two, educate and inspire the next generation of human that will be able to potentially be your next hire or the things that you do. And last but definitely not least, what's really lovely about committing to open source is you can make the smallest changes that make a big impact. So if you've ever been on a website and you see a typo or something like that, and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I wish I could fix this. Well, committing to open source, you can fix it. It's such a great community collaboration. So it can be a little bit intimidating, though, getting involved if it's something you haven't done before. And I would say if it's something that you do a lot, please inspire the humans next to you, your colleagues, the junior developers that you work with. People use the word open source so willy-nilly and throw it around so much that people just feel like they have to nod and go, yeah, 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 instead of asking those questions. So break down that barrier and help each other. Again, the biggest misconception is that you have to commit code. Some of the most neglected parts of open source projects are not in the code, and I'll tell you now, a maintainer will love you forever if you pitch in with other things. So what are those other things? Well, do you like to plan events? Is that your thing? You can organize a meetup or community event where people come together around that project. If you like to design, you can think of the way they lay out their projects and how the accessibility is and usability of their project. If you like to write, you can help write the documentation, organizational skills, look at duplicate issues, help rename those issue labels, and keep things organized. Obviously, if you do like to code, you can submit feature requests, but please, please, please talk to maintainers as well. Don't just submit things into the ether. You can help people, so you can jump onto things like Stack Overflow or Reddit or anything like that and help people answer questions. And if you do joy in helping people code, you can do code reviews and you can put together things, write tutorials on how to use the project itself. So again, by all means, submit feature requests, but there's so many other ways you can get involved. I feel like I'm running out of time because I can hear clapping. You might also wonder, well, how do I find open source projects to commit to? And I'd say everything starts at home. So think about the stuff that you already use. If you're using a tool or some open source software and you find a bug and you decide to look at the source and you patch that bug, don't keep it all to yourself. Submit that back so that when in the next update, that'll benefit both you and your friends that use that tool. So don't only keep those patches for yourself. I like to think that open source is just a fancy term for treating the world's problems as fixable. Let's try fix it all together. And again, if we think about the recycle, recycle, recycle thing I was talking about, if you do commit to open source, if you do get involved in different things, write that blog post about it, talk about it at events, guide and mentor other people to get involved. All these things allow people to see your name within the community, and it really enhances your brand when you are looking to grow your career. So let's get on to the final thing of how do we find a job with all of this? So I'll be honest, I haven't actually submitted a CV for a job in probably the last 10 years. And the only reason why is because of community and the people that I have met in the community. You can also ask any hiring manager, is anyone in this room looking to hire right now? They've got open jobs. If you could not look through a stack of CVs about this big, you would choose not to, right? We don't want to look at a big stack of applications. No one is good at writing CVs. No one good at writing job descriptions. We hate it. We just want cool people doing good things in our organization. So how do we do that? How do we get on top of the pile? How do we make sure that someone knows who we are? And that is purely through your community engagement. People seeing you speak at conferences, you engaging with humans that are sitting right next to you. As I said, people come and go from roles, they're growing teams, and they want to have interesting conversations with people around them. I work at Snyk right now. The way I got the job was I knew Simon Maple for about 10 years, and he phoned me up and he said, do you want to come do this thing? And I said, no. And he was like, come have coffee. And for some reason, I was in 3 interviews. I didn't know how that happened. And it's all through the power of community. The other amazing thing about getting to know people outside of a stereotypical sort of job application process is people will tell you a lot about what it's like to work on a team or with a project over a beer or a soft drink or whatever else. But Have you ever started a company where through the whole interview process, I call it a bit of a one-night stand, excuse the thing. You like go on 1 or 2 interviews and then you have to decide whether you work for this company and they sold you the dream and it was going to be amazing. And then you start on your first day and you think, why am I here? This is not what I was sold. Well, if you get involved in speaking to people during this, they'll tell you what it's like to work there. Over a beer, they will rant about the project that isn't working or the manager that's a bit micromanagery, and you can get to know that before you're part of the process. But also I would say is if anyone does rant and go on about how terrible something is, think about what's important to you. They could be complaining about a project and you think, you know what, I'd love to fix that. That's actually something that's interesting to me. That's a role that you will enjoy and they might not. If they're talking about the way someone manages someone and you think to yourself, well, I like to be managed that way. You're all individual people. You're all human beings. Just because someone has a negative experience doesn't mean that you won't have a positive one. You just need to decide what you personally like. And again, speaking to each other, asking questions. I had an email from a friend today wanting to apply for a role at Sneak because they saw it online, and so they wanted to know a little bit more. I'm not the hiring manager. I can't guarantee they get the job, but because we're friends, I straight away pinged HR and said, who is the hiring manager on this? And then sent over his LinkedIn, because we've made that connection. And that's one step further and closer for you to understand how you can get those roles and work for those dream companies or do those cool things. Another example of this is a friend of mine wants to work. He wasn't in the Java space, but they were working. He was a database engineer, he was .NET, working on something, and he really wanted to work with this new technology, but he had never used it commercially, and so he did a few hacks on it, and then emailed them, and he was like, I've never actually done this commercially, but I really liked X, Y, and Z. Can I chat to someone? And before he knew it, he was in the interview process for that role. Didn't get the job in the end. He actually didn't want it. It wasn't what he wanted. But he started to break down those barriers through normal conversation. And that kind of circles me back to my original point. This can't be dramatic. There we go. It's very point of the people making decisions about your career don't always see your code. And they should be seeing and hearing your name. So thank you very, very much. I'm Sam Hepburn. I hope you enjoyed that. But please remember, you have done half the work already by just doing your day job. And just do one thing, just one small thing, where it's writing that blog, submitting that CFP. Just do one thing when you get home today. Get involved in the NL Drug Speaker Clinic. And hope you enjoyed it. I'm Sam.